Hey, hello guys, welcome back. This is Viren Kumar. So today in this video session, I am going to discuss about the pipelines in the Azure DevOps. So we will understand the pipeline concept in this video theoretically, and then I will show on my desktop from the web portals how we can create the pipelines and what are the pipeline concept. So before going to start with the pipelines, I want to explain that a pipeline in general terms, we know the concept. It has the two phase. From the one phase we always provide the input, and from the another end we will get the output. The same concept is provided in the DevOps. Now what is the DevOps pipeline? This can be the interview questions also. What is the DevOps pipelines? So a DevOps pipeline is a set of automated process and the tools. Okay, we have a lot of process in the pipeline sections, and we club all these process and make a pipeline, and each and every step will executed automatically one by one. Okay, and why we are creating these process and the stuff? So that a developer and the operational team can work together, so that they can deploy and build the code for the production environment in the software industry. A CI/CD pipeline automates the software delivery process. If you are working in a software company, then you know the SDLC model, software development lifecycle. So we develop the software and then we deliver the software in the production environment so that end user can use this product. But we need to do some testing, we need to perform some actions, we need to do some quality checks. So these things are done through the CI/CD pipelines, that is automatically. A pipeline builds the code when a developer writes a code. The source code is there. So what he will do, he will push the code to some repository. From there, the CI/CD tool will pick the code and the pipeline will build the code. It will run the test, the continuous integrations test, and safely deploy a new version of the application in the production environment that we call the continuous delivery. So that is all the automatic process. There is no human is required to do that. Only the initial configuration and setup is required. The automated pipelines remove the manual errors. When a person is doing each and every these things, maybe he can do some errors. He can forget some steps to perform before the production. But the CI/CD tool is the machine, or you can see it's a process. It won't do the human errors. Okay, so that we can reduce. Provide the standard feedback to the developers. So if a build is failed, it will provide the feedback to the developer that the build goes failed, so that the developer can take or the rebuild, or he can fix the environmental issue or some development issue or the building issue. Then he can rebuild the product. Okay, so this is the DevOps pipeline in the general concept. There are the two types of the pipelines. One is the CI pipelines and the CD pipelines. CI pipelines in the Azure DevOps is continuous integrations pipeline. The CD pipeline is the continuous delivery pipelines. In CI pipelines, what are the steps or the set, the process, build, test, then if you want to do the code coverage testing, quality check, and the security checks. So these comes under the CI pipelines. One is the delivery pipelines, then we have the continuous delivery pipelines. Continuous delivery pipelines, we have the deployment, we have the QA for the testing, we have the staging environment, and then we have the production environment. So we can deliver the build into the specific environment. Now we are coming to talk about the Azure pipelines. The Azure pipelines is a cloud service that we can use to build and test the code project automatically. So in general terms, you can define the pipeline is used to build and the test code automatically. The Azure pipelines has a lot of capabilities such as continuous integrations and the continuous delivery. On the regular and consistently test and build our code and ship to any target. A pipeline has two ends. As you know, every pipelines in the general terms, you have the water pipelines, it have the two ends, the input and the output end. Like that in the Azure pipelines, we have the two end. Between these two ends, there are multiple stages and segments, such as the output of the one stage is connected to the input of the next stage. Means input of the one stage, output of the one stage, and again input of the one stage. So like that, the stages are connected to each other, and each stage performs specific operations. Each stage is nothing but it's just a set of actions that we want to perform on a particular build. Now, what are the features of the Azure pipelines? Azure pipelines basically open source projects. 10 free pipelines are available. Parallel jobs with unlimited minutes per month. Microsoft hosted CI/CD pipelines. Self-hosted CI/CD pipelines. So one free in the Azure DevOps. We are talking in the Azure DevOps. The types will come under in this section. So when the developer will push the code in the GitHub repository, the Azure pipelines will take. So first it will come to the build pipelines that we called the build pipeline or the build. It represents the CI's integrations in the Azure DevOps. So continuous integration is represented by the build pipeline. Once the build pipeline is complete, it will give the output to the release pipeline. So release pipeline will take as an input of the build. Okay, and in the Azure we called is the continuous delivery. Okay, release takes the artifact and the release deploy it. What needs to be use Azure pipelines? Okay, now if you want to work with the Azure pipelines, what you need? The first thing is that you need to have one organization. Second, you need to have the one project under this one organization, user permissions to use the pipelines, and you have the source code stored in the version control systems. Any source code repository need to have the source code that is developed by the developers. Now, why Azure pipelines? Works with any language in the platform. So Azure pipelines can work with any language in the platform. That means if your application is Java, C#, ASP.NET, PHP, any language is there, then the Azure DevOps will support any language applications and the platforms. If the application is for the Microsoft operating systems, Macintosh operating system, Linux, any operating systems, it will support. It will deploy to the different type of the targets at the same times. At the same time, you can deploy to the different types of targets. Means that if you have the multiple environments like the staging environment, test environment, or the production environment, you can deploy these applications and the build at the same time. Integrate with the Azure deployments. Okay. Build on the Windows, Linux, and the Macintosh machine, integrated with the GitHub, works with the open source project like Sonarqube, Jenkins, Maven. It works with the open source project. Means you can integrate a lot of project or the tools with the Azure pipelines. Now in the Azure pipelines, how we define the pipelines? There are one way is that we can define with the YAML syntax. Okay, YAML is the language by which you can define the Azure pipelines. So the basic step is the configure Azure pipelines to use the Git repo. Then you will have the Azure pipelines.yml file to define your build, and that we can edit as per our requirement. Then we can push the code to version control repository. Defining the pipelines using the classic interface. This is the second method to define the Azure pipelines, that through the classic interface. So we can create and configure the pipelines in the Azure DevOps web portals with the classic user interface. There is no coding required for this one, and this is the very easy way to define and create a pipelines. So classic interface, if you are a beginner, then you can surely use the classic interface to define your pipeline. So let me take to the web portal. So this is the web portal, Azure dev.azure.com. If you have the one account and if you have created the one organization, you can navigate to this link. Then you need to create a one project. Under this project, you can see the option of the pipelines. You can see these are the pipelines. Okay, now you can click on the pipeline. Under this pipeline sections, you can create the build pipelines. If you want to create a build pipeline in Azure DevOps, you can take these pipelines. Okay, then you have the new pipelines. If you want to create a release or the deployment pipelines, you can create on the release section. So under the release sections, you can create a release. Under the releases, you can create the deployment pipelines. So in the pipeline sections, you can see the new pipeline is there. So you can create the new pipeline. Now you can choose if you know the YAML language. Is I discussed that we have the two ways to create the pipeline. YAML language based on your requirement. Where is your GitHub code? You can directly select the options, or you can use the classic editor. This is the classic interface. So for a beginner, we can use this one. So this is the first way you can create the pipeline, and you can select all these options. Okay, then you can say the continue. Now you can create the empty job for this one. Okay, now you have the build pipeline, so you can do the configurations of the pipelines. This agent is there. On which agent you want to run, agent specifications, and the sources. So you have the Azure Git repository source code. You can access the source code from there, and agent job. Okay, now you can save. So this is your build pipeline. Okay, now you want to create the deploy pipeline. So you can go to the releases. There you can create release. Okay. To create the deploy pipelines, you have the new one is there. So new release pipeline. So first you need to create the new release pipeline. You can click on the new release pipeline, and then you can select the empty job, stage 1 environment. Okay, you can close it. Now this is the new release pipeline. It's called the deployment pipeline. So now you can add the artifact. So that you can select the build. So recently which build you have like executed, that build you can add into this one, and you can add the job and the task. So staging environment, you can select the agent pool. So Azure Pipelines pools, you can select any specific, and you can save it. Now you can create the release deployment. So you can create the release, and you can go to the release sections. Now you can see the deployment is happening. Okay, this is in the queue and waiting for the Azure Pipelines. So like that you can create. This is only the brief about how you can create the build pipeline. So you can create the build pipeline through the pipeline sections. You can create the deployment pipeline through the releases tab.